Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're here for the Connected Community Building Trust, Healing, and Belonging across the Mid-South, hosted by the Foundation for the Mid-South and the Mississippi TRHT Alliance. Before we begin, I would like to extend a special thanks to our sponsor, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, for their generous support and continued commitment to advancing racial healing and transformational change throughout our region. Today, we're introducing the TRHT Framework. This five module leadership development cohort designed to equip a diverse group of leaders with the tools, relationships, and vision to advance racial healing and systemic change in their communities. First, we're joined by Dr. Rodney Washington, owner of Consultant Plus LLC and the evaluator of the Mississippi TRHT Initiative. Rodney works with leaders across sectors to deepen their understanding and racial healing and strengthen their ability to lead meaningful change. We'll begin with leadership. Before transformation doesn't start with policy, it starts with people. Rodney, would you share the purpose and urgency of the cohort? How are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, Brother Cassio, it's good to see you.
You too, man. So let's start. Share the purpose and urgency of the cohort and what leaders experience over the 5-month journey, and how strong peer networks help sustain long-term impact.
Sure. And so when we think about this cohort, we wanted to understand how we could get the most reach and impact. We know that as an organization that we can't go out and do all this work, alone. And also it's important to note that this work can't be siloed and think that we will have maximum outcomes to happen. So with this work, we wanted to understand that by having these cohorts in sort of a TOT model, sort of a train the trainer model, that we're taking a team science approach, that this leadership spectrum will go across age ranges and generations. You have college students, faith-based communities, other members of the communities doing grassroots work, but all under the same community visioning that's provided in the implementation guide from the TRHT framework. And so that's where we land, in this work right now. A common vision that was established early on in the work that allows this work to both we train our partners, they train their constituents, and then it becomes embedded in their daily practices as a more sustainable model.
Thank you. So let's start with the presentation, if we could.
Sure. So we want to try and get an understanding of first the TRHT framework. So we've been at this for a while, and so I'll jump right in. Next slide. And so in our initial year, even though all of us have had a great deal of work in our communities, we didn't want to jump in with our notions of why this work would be important to implement and execute in the community. And note that I'm not saying that this is a project. This is a systems change model. And so we wanted to create safe spaces around these uncomfortable topics around race and racism. And so the initial launch was around a survey that we provided to just understand how people were feeling. Do you think enough is being done around racism or race relations and racial healing in our state, given our history and all of those components? And we had a large feedback, and people thought that I want to learn more about how I can make a difference. And the primary reason from the surveys that we got was because they wanted a better Mississippi for young people to have that maybe they didn't experience. Next slide. And so when our community, from that, we started pulling together community conversations. We know that in order to reach across the aisle, we needed the people who will probably be most resistant to talking about race matters. And so we tried to employ a diverse partnership, and we busted our state up into regions. We had North Mississippi partner, Central Mississippi, which included the Jackson metro area, the Mississippi Delta, and coastal Mississippi, where we brought those partners in as in a process that employed environmental scans to understand who was on the ground already doing the work. We didn't want to offend anyone or think that we were coming in as outsiders trying to do work that they were already implementing. So we pulled these partners on board and say, how can we support the work that you're already doing, and then expand your reach and under a strategic process as provided by the implementation guide. And that's where the community visioning process comes from. Each community is not a monolith. And so every partner got an opportunity to come forward and say, this is what the change should look like in our community. And so we know the coast can be vastly different from central Mississippi, that can be vastly different from the Mississippi Delta, that can be really different from North Mississippi. So we got all these partners that were already anchored in each one of these regions to come in and let us know, what community voices, we're saying, and how we can come together with a common vision that may not look the same, but is under the same framework. Next slide. And so here's the TRHT model framework that we're using. And this is where I really want to, let you know that there's an overarching component of narrative change. And we see that narrative change can happen around a lot of different components, where there's entertainment, journalism, and all of those other tenets. But under that, the racial healing and relationship building comes from these three pillars: separation, law, and economy. We were not trying to do all three of those, but we chose the one that was most relevant to our Mississippi findings. And so economy was the one that stood out the most. So they talked about structured inequality and barriers to opportunity. We know that while we're improving in areas like education, we know wealth building, workforce development, employment opportunities, they are a challenge here in this state. And so each one of our partners began to think about how we can go out and really launch a process to understand how we can improve in these areas. And so when we think about that, we then develop the training modules. We have been in the communities for about 2 or 3 years now. And so we understand that by launching these things, we're in a position now to launch these 4 core modules that each of the partners could train their constituents, but both embedded into their practices on a daily. And so that's where we will see sustainable change and sort of a team science approach that you will hear the partners talk about on this call. And so with that, I'll switch it back over to you, Cassie. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to go through all of this content.
Thank you, Rodney. You reminded us that before systems change, leaders must be willing to do the internal and relationship work. And I think that's what we're going to be doing in these modules. Next, we'll hear from Brian Crawford, president of Mission Mississippi. Brian guides communities through healing and relational practices that builds empathy, trust, and connection across divides. And he'll guide us through healing across divides, building relationships and trust. Brian, we appreciate your leadership and welcome.
Thanks, Cassio. Really excited to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. As Cassio mentioned, I'm Brian Crawford, and I serve a Christian nonprofit dedicated to the work of racial healing, both in and through the Christian community throughout Mississippi and beyond. And as Cassio mentioned, my assignment is to talk a little bit about healing divides across differences.
So please share.
The slide. Excellent. So my working theory around the issue, Cassio, is that the foundation of every training and coaching session that we've ever conducted across this state, and it's this: deep and sustained community transformation is only possible where deep relationships across dividing lines are being cultivated. We cannot cultivate those relationships without first developing the ability to navigate our differences, our history, our pain, our political differences, our cultural distinctions. We must learn to navigate those divides, those differences, if we are going to see true flourishing in our communities. Now, before we can actually do that, we need to start with awareness, an honest look at where we are. And that initial effort is where I'm going to spend the remainder of my time today. Next slide. One of my great heroes, one of my greatest heroes in this work is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in 1962, speaking at Cornell University, a mere 6 years before he was assassinated, Dr. King said, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other, and they fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other, and they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other." Now, if you read that genius chain backwards, you have a roadmap, you have a journey of sorts. Next slide. That separation leads to a lack of communication, and a lack of communication that leads to ignorance of one another, and ignorance that breeds fear and breeds distrust, and fear and distrust that's, when left unchecked, ultimately manifests itself in the deepest forms of hatred and division. You see, this quote creates a journey for us, and it's a journey that shapes the work that we do to give people awareness of where we are in most communities versus where we should desire and ultimately aim to be. Next slide. When most of us think about racial healing, we think about level one, moving from separation to integration, making sure everyone has equal access to the same spaces, schools, neighborhoods, churches, businesses, positions of power. And that matters. It absolutely matters. It is fundamental to the TRHT framework. Next slide. But here's the truth. Integration is just the tip of the iceberg, according to King. It's the tip of the iceberg in terms of healing divides across difference and bringing community transformation. You see, we can share space and still remain ignorant of one another. And in our ignorance, we can share spaces and actually grow in our distrust instead of building trust in relationships. So we must go further. Next slide. Level two is moving from silence to communication. When you close the physical gap between people, you must create a new kind of conversation, one with depth and vulnerability, and one that invites storytelling without immediate critique and correction. A conversation where people seek to understand and not just merely win, where you can see without fear of rejection and ask questions with humble curiosity. And it's that deeper communication, that sharing of experience and that sharing of story that leads us to level three, moving from ignorance to a genuine knowledge of one another, a knowledge that moves beyond assumptions and resumes and even biographies, but a knowledge that is deep and even intimate, a knowledge that uncovers fears and regards and concerns and can fully unveil itself in the midst of safety. Next slide. That's why we have to create shared space. But then we must labor to make that space vulnerable and authentic and curious in order to share stories. And it's that space that allows for gracious challenge and humble curiosity. It's that space that produces wisdom. You know, in 1954, the psychologist Gordon Allport produced a seminal work called The Nature of Prejudice, which introduced what's known as the contact hypothesis. The core ideal is this: prejudice can be contested prejudice can be contested rather when different groups are given the opportunity to actually make contact with one another, to be in proximity, to connect, and to ultimately build trust. But it's not just about putting people in the same room. It's putting people in the same room in the right conditions. For example, Allport highlighted that there must be equal status, common goals, cooperative activities, not competition, but cooperation, and then the support of authority and customs, laws, and institutional backing in order to create a space where that close proximity leads to flourishing and leads to a more unified community. And that's the beating heart of King's insight in this whole journey. We are separated, so we don't talk. We don't talk because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we fear each other. Closing that physical gap is just the beginning. We still have to build the framework for good conversation. And for good conversation comes real, and from good conversation comes real knowledge. And from real knowledge comes trust. Next slide. So if we build trust, we begin to realize that we share the same goal: healthier communities, safer streets, and educated people. And your success equals my success. They are inextricably tied together. With space and stories shared under the right conditions and under the right pretenses, we are able to align our struggles and pursuits towards common ends and common purposes. James Baldwin calls this relationship, the relationship that we have between Black and Brown Americans and white Americans, a marriage in which, whether we like it or not, we are bound together. We are a part of each other. And we come to see that and embrace that. When we come to see that and embrace that, we can bring about change. Next slide. When we do all of this well, when we walk through these levels and take this journey together, we arrive at shared success. Next slide. And more than shared success, what we arrive at ultimately is a deeper and abiding love across lines of disagreement. Not an agreement that erases our differences, but an understanding that transcends them for the greater good of the communities in which we dwell. At Mission, Mississippi, we like to say agreement is not always the goal. Many of our differences may never be fully restored, but deeper understanding, deeper empathy, and deeper love, all of those are within reach. And that is the kind of transformation that our communities so desperately need. In closing, I would like to point you to some current opportunities that you can possibly take advantage of. The Foundation for the Mid-South, through the gracious support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation is hosting this Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation cohort, which I'm sure we will talk more about throughout this webinar. But this cohort will dive more deeply into bringing transformation through healing divides across differences. So please, please stay connected to the foundation for more information on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. You've shown us that healing isn't accidental, right? It's thoughtful, it's structured, and it's intentional. And I think from the work that you're doing and the work that the Mississippi Alliance is going to be doing, I think we're going to see those things. So I really appreciate you. And finally, we're joined
Thank you,
by.
Cassio.
No, you're welcome, sir. I look forward to the panel. And finally, we're joined by Susan Womack, who serves as a Vice President of Advancement Operations at Millsaps. Susan will guide us through, help us understand the tensions to systems by sharing tackling systems divide. Susan, we're grateful to hear your perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cassio. It's so good to be here today. This work is just really, really important to me personally and important to our community and our state. So I will say that our work at Millsaps is fundamentally about connecting, healing, and transforming our community. And that's why this framework resonates so deeply with us. It doesn't just ask us to fix problems, it asks us to envision the kind of community we want to become. And as the framework guide suggests, it offers a holistic approach to change. It addresses the head and the heart. It addresses the intrapersonal and the interpersonal and systemic challenges, while also placing the power of authentic, trust-based solidarity at the center of our work. And I think that balance between analysis and relationship, between truth and healing is critical if we're serious about tackling the systems that divide us. And if we're going to address those systems, we first have to understand how and why they exist. And I think another important thing about this framework is you're going to hear a lot of the same themes run throughout all of this work, whether it's individual work, whether it's systemic work, institutional work, or whatever. You're going to hear some of these same themes run throughout the process, which I think makes it very, very strong. Next slide, please. In this country and in our own communities, we have a long history rooted in the false belief in a hierarchy of human value. And that is the belief, which is often unspoken but deeply held, that some people matter more than others. And when that belief becomes embedded over time and reinforced through our policies and practices designed to separate people, it becomes normalized. It shapes our social, economic, and political systems in ways that can feel natural or inevitable, even when they're deeply unjust. And that's what we see happening in a lot of our world. Next slide, please. Over time, these systems, which are intentionally designed to advantage some groups and disadvantage others, become invisible to those that are not harmed by them. But for those who are impacted, the consequences are severe and long-lasting. The systems don't just affect individuals, they compound across generations. They create concentrated poverty, limited access to opportunity, and persistent inequities that are incredibly difficult to undo. So these results impact the whole community, not just the individuals. And for many of us, the question isn't whether systems work, but who they work for and at whose expense. Next slide, please. So when we talk about systems, we're not talking about abstractions. We're talking about where families live, where children go to school, whether people can access care when they need it. And in Mississippi, when we're trying to address economic problems, all of these situations and circumstances feed into the economic well-being of our people. So let's talk about education. Schools in this country were once legally segregated by race. And today, while segregation may no longer be mandated by law, many communities, including Jackson, are experiencing resegregation in schools by race and income, with vastly unequal resources and outcomes. We see it in our health systems and our mental health systems that disproportionately affect underserved populations, whether it's fragmented or absent care, or high cost, or lack of insurance, or provider shortages, or even language barriers. We see that some Mississippians are basically without health and mental health care. We see it in housing. Our federal policies that happened years ago, like redlining, where they literally drew red lines around Black neighborhoods, denying families access to home loans and preventing wealth building through home ownership, which is one of the most reliable pathways to financial stability for individuals and for communities. Next slide, please. And the inequities don't stop with those three big areas. They show up in lots of systems: employment systems, legal systems, economic systems that continue to reward proximity to power while penalizing those historically excluded from it. And when we're talking about economic systems, we're particularly talking about housing, employment, and even in higher ed institutions, we're talking about financial aid access for students. And sometimes it's harder to get for some students than others, or loans are predatory versus productive. Our systems are complex. They won't just be fixed overnight. They weren't built overnight. And so it will take us quite a while and quite a bit of work to improve some of these systems. Next slide, please. I think that's where the TRHT framework is so valuable, because it asks us to address the right questions as a community. What systems should we prioritize when we're doing this work? Where do we have the greatest opportunity for impact? Who needs to be at the table, including the voices of people who are typically not heard, and even unlikely allies? And what concrete actions can help move us from intention to transformation? These are all important questions that guide strategic planning as we attempt this work. But I agree so much with Brian that the most important starting point is relationship. Next slide, please. Before we can change systems, we have to build trust. And through practices like circle conversations, which is at the core of the framework, we create spaces where people come together and listen deeply and speak honestly about their personal experiences and begin to understand how systems affect lives differently. These conversations don't replace policy change or systems change. They make it possible. They allow us to do the hard work of naming our barriers, imagining alternatives, and committing together to the long work of change. And that's how we answer that very first question about envisioning the kind of community we want to become. It's how we move toward a community grounded in dignity and in belonging and shared responsibility for one another's well-being. So I will end there by saying I'm wholeheartedly behind this framework because it works. We know it works.
Susan, that was awesome. I really, just listening to you, I realized that, we don't realize we all play a role in the systems or racism, because we're all connected to some or lead some type of system. So I really appreciate you for going in depth and really breaking it down for us. With that said, I'd love to bring everyone back together for a conversation. Hello. Thank you all. I think you all was very intentional about laying out the framework and really getting us to understand how all these things are relational or how they're connected. We've explored leadership, we've explored healing, system transformation, and so let's look at how all three of those work together to build truly connected communities. So Brian, I'll first like to come to you. What is one of the biggest misconceptions you see leaders have about racial healing work?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Casio. I think it ties right back into my presentation that I made and talking about that journey that King highlights for us, where people see the sharing of space as the arrival, as the destination for this work, instead of the beginning of this work. And so oftentimes trying to convince leaders, practitioners, even folk in the everyday community, that the sharing of space, the sharing of power and positions, the sharing of neighborhoods, the sharing of schools and educational capital is in many ways the beginning of our work as it relates to building transformative, deep, abiding, unified communities. There still remains the necessity to share our stories. There still remains the necessity for those shared stories to lead us to a sharing of struggle. And it's in those sharing of stories and in those sharing of struggles that we begin to really see progress and a shared success that we can all be proud of and excited about.
Well, thank you, Susan. Let me turn to you. You it was really important that you spoke of these systems, but you also spoke of we didn't they wasn't built in one day, and so it's going to take time. So when
Right.
leaders are working to change deeply rooted racist systems, how do they balance urgency with patience?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's really common for leaders to feel caught between the very real harm that people are experiencing right now, and want to fix that immediately, and balancing that with the reality that the systems weren't built overnight. And so they won't be changed quickly in a lot of situations. And it's important to try and remain focused and resilient versus being reactive and becoming disheartened. That takes a lot of planning, I think. It takes identifying some immediate actions that can reduce harm and remove barriers that can be maybe short term successes. It looks at medium term successes, which might include institutional policy or practice, and then longer term successes, which really is about transformation of beliefs and changing the norms in our community. That incremental progress is really important. Self-care is critical to remaining resilient for leaders, for anybody who is involved in this work. And self-care shows up in a lot of different ways for different people. But I do think it's very important for us to understand going in that we will have some successes. We will hit some really tough roadblocks. We will have to regroup. We will have to adapt. People change, environments change. And so it is very important for us to find those ways to remain resilient throughout the process.
Thank you. No, I think that's really because this is hard work, right?
Mhm.
It's hard work. Is emotionally hard, physically hard, and spiritually hard. So
Right.
I appreciate that. So Rodney, I'd love to have your perspective on how important are cross sector partnerships in shifting systems.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. I've been doing program evaluation for quite some time, well over 15 years, and working with a lot of different organizations. The work can become very siloed and it become very person-centered, right? And so team science is an approach that understands that our problems are too complex for one person to handle or one organization or one approach. And that's why I love the community visioning part of this, because I can have a great and amazing person on my team. If that person leaves, so does that process that they've created around themselves. Or that person leaves and the community sees the organization differently. So I think Casio is great and amazing, but I don't want to work with anyone else. I think that it's important for us to understand that we can have a great model that works, but passion alone is not going to get us there. So how do you know that what you're doing is working? Because I love what I do. That's great and amazing, but loving what you do and having that knowledge spread out so other organizations can follow it without having to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch, it is an important part of that. And so I think we can get so bogged down into getting in the trenches and making sure that we're meeting the needs of communities, that we are not so involved with creating models that can be replicated across organizations for others to follow, that can create large scale change at the systems level. So I think that we have to take a multi-sector approach and see it from all sides, and also disagree with how it's going to happen so we can have some tough conversations to get to some greater outcomes.
No, that was really insightful, because part of this that you're speaking of is that when these sectors come together, um, that's the only way we're going to see change. So that leads me to my final question, and I would like for each one of you to take a minute to discuss. Um, once we've done some work with leaders, we've gotten them to heal, right? We gotten the leaders to heal. We have taken um, we have tackled systems, and we're working to getting the system changed. We have a cohort of faith-based leaders to college students to college staff. Once we've done this, um, what could we see? What could the community see? What could the world see? Um, if this truly took root, what will we see in the next 5 years? Susan, you can take it first if you like.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, I think an important part of this work, as someone mentioned earlier, is that it calls for change to be community specific. So it won't be the same, it won't look exactly the same in every community where the work is happening. And I think that's really valuable, because a lot of community success can build momentum for bigger things. And from a statewide perspective, I think we could see communities around the state using this framework to create their own specific change. We know this framework works. And as we're seeing community change, I hope we could have people come together and learn from each other about the successes they're having in their individual communities. You know, systems really can be small or large. As an institution, you can have employment systems and hiring practices and all different kinds of things that can be very institutionally specific. And then that can branch out into community, into the state, into the nation, and so forth. So I would like to see us have a network of people who are having great success at their community level that we could bring together and address some harmful systems on the statewide level.
Thank you, Susan. Brian, let's go to you. What will we see in the next 5 years with the work that Mission Mississippi is doing? What will we see?
Yeah, I think we'll see a broader network of coaches, Casio, not just kind of condensed at a central level, but collapsed at local levels, and so coaches in and through local communities that can convey all the ideas that we have been spending time unpacking, and obviously the cohort will more fully flesh out. So I think coaching will be more extensive. I also think that collaboration at the local level will be enhanced, because if people are really getting this message, they will understand that their destinies are tied together, that it doesn't matter what side of the street you live on, what side of the tracks you come from, your destinies are intertwined. And so that will create a motivation for us to listen to one another, to work together, to ensure that your struggle is my struggle and vice versa. And so I think you will see a lot more collaboration and communication across difference. But I also think that's going to lead ultimately to more cooperation in the activity, in the actions of a community, where the restorative efforts will not just be comprised to one specific group, but the restorative efforts will be a result or be a product of all groups coming to the table, strategizing and dreaming and visioning for solutions that will bring flourishing to the whole. And so I think all of those things will increase and be enhanced if the work is succeeding for us in the next 5 years.
Thanks, Brian. Rodney, when we're looking at as an evaluator,
Yeah,
right?
you set me
As
up,
an evaluator, you mentioned you've been evaluating projects for the last 10 to 15 years. As an evaluator, I know 5 years may be short for you, but what would you like to see for this project for Mississippi and using this framework and using this cohort model? What would you like to see? What would it look like for you as an evaluator and somebody who's been in this work for some time?
Yeah, so I love this question, Cassio, and I'm going to keep it short. But I love this question because it has a time frame to understand that this is not going to happen overnight. I would love for us to have measurable outcomes that we can all see, where this is not the same intervention that we're trying to work on today, but it looks different. It's an iterative process that is co-designed by the partners and residents in their communities to understand that it's not overnight, but in 3 to 5 years, we're not where we started, right? And it's a bigger conversation to set some realistic expectations that we begin to see systems that see the humanity in everyone. And so that's my wish list, that we don't set ourselves up to think that in 5 that this framework, while it's great and amazing, is going to be the magic wand. This is the guide for us to follow that can help us prompt systems level change. And in 3 years, we have another set of benchmarks that we can reach. And in 5 years, another set. And in 10 years, in a sustainable model that we can keep moving toward the overarching goal where everyone is seen on an equal playing field and we can see the humanity and potential in everyone. And so that is my goal, that we don't lose sight to say that this project is going to come in and do something magical, but the work that is entailed in it will allow us to make significant gains.
No, that's really, thank you so much. And thanks for each one of you all. I was so glad that you all didn't say that we was gonna change the conditions, we was gonna change racism in Mississippi, because then I was like, okay, well, for FMS, we got a long work to do. We gotta so thank you all for being very intentional and thoughtful about what to change. And I think you all, each one of you all gave the community something they can start where we can start at, right? We have a few more minutes, so I was just like for each one of you all to kind of looking at where we are in Mississippi. Give me one word on in those 5 years you would hope we could be. 1 or 2 words. Right now, I'm gonna go back to you, and I'll let, and Brian, then Susan, you can close it out.
I would say intentional optimism.
I would say discontent. We should remain discontent with status quo and continue to fight for progress.
Yeah, and I'm going to take some words from Brian that I really liked in your presentation, and that is unified transformation.
Well, I sincerely thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Rodney Washington, Brian Crawford, and Susan for sharing your leadership, your insight, and your heart with us today. This work of racial healing and sensory transformation isn't quick. We all know that, and it isn't certainly isn't easy, but it's necessary, and it's possible. And I think we have shown that today. So thank you all as well, everyone who's joined us. We hope today's conversation encourages you, challenges you, and strengthen your commitment to building trust, advancing healing, and creating a true sense of belonging in your community. We invite you to join us next month, where we'll continue the conversation by discussing gun violence, as a public health crisis. And once again, our sincere thanks to W.K. Kellogg Foundation for sponsoring today's webinar and supporting this work. And I would also like to thank our CEO and President, Greg Johnson, and our board for having the insight to invest in a project like this. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a healing, good day. So I appreciate you all for joining us. Remember, next month, and continue to be with Foundation for the Mid-South, where we expand knowledge and we save lives. So thank you all.